The story begins in a cramped one-room apartment, where peeling paint on the walls carried silent testimony to years of struggle. Arman, a man in his late 20s, rose before dawn each day to begin a cycle that had defined his life. Work, sacrifice, repeat. He was not lazy, nor without ambition, but life had handed him little and demanded much. With calloused hands and a heart full of quiet determination, he dreamed of building a better future, one brick at a time. Beside him stood Zara, his wife of 3 years. Where Arman saw beauty and patience, Zara saw only chains and poverty. She had grown up surrounded by stories of wealth, social media images of glittering lifestyles, and neighbors who lived more comfortably than she ever could. She did not hate Arman, not exactly. She admired his dedication, but admiration did not silence the gnawing hunger for more. Their marriage had been a love story once. He had nothing to offer her but devotion, and at first it was enough. She laughed at his jokes, encouraged his plans, and told herself that love could carry them through lean years. But as time stretched on, Zara's patience with his modest earnings thinned. The joy of love dimmed under the weight of unpaid bills, cheap clothes, and the embarrassment of never affording small luxuries. Arman noticed the subtle shifts, but refused to believe they meant something darker. She dressed more carefully when stepping out, applied perfume for errands that lasted longer than they should, and spoke wistfully about neighbors who drove new cars or dined at fine restaurants. He would smile, hug her, and promise that one day he would provide everything she deserved. His words were sincere, but sincerity did not change their reality. On evenings when Arman returned home exhausted, Zara would scroll through her phone, eyes lingering on pictures of women draped in designer dresses, standing beside men who looked powerful and secure. A quiet resentment grew inside her. Why should she settle for struggle when the world offered so much more? One evening, Arman came home early with a small surprise, a pair of earrings he had saved for months to buy. They were not expensive, but they sparkled gently under the dim light of their room. He placed them in her hand, his face glowing with pride. Zara forced a smile, kissed his cheek, and whispered thanks. Yet deep inside, a voice mocked the gesture. What good were earrings when she dreamed of diamonds? Later that night, as Arman slept peacefully beside her, Zara's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She glanced at the screen, her lips curving into a faint, guilty smile. A new name had appeared in her messages, one that carried the promise of attention, charm, and perhaps the wealth she secretly craved. She hesitated for a moment, then tapped the screen. Arman turned in his sleep, mumbling her name with tender familiarity, unaware that the first cracks in their love had already deepened into something dangerous. And so, the journey from poor to rich was set in motion, though not in the way Arman ever imagined. Zara's world began to shift the moment she replied to that message. The sender was Khalid, a businessman known in their neighborhood for his sharp suits, expensive cars, and a confidence that seemed to draw attention wherever he went. Their first exchanges were harmless, polite words, casual compliments, but the tone changed quickly. Khalid was a master of flattery, and he spoke the language Zara longed to hear. "You deserve more than this life," he wrote one evening. "A woman like you should never settle for less." The words sank deep into her heart. Arman's promises of someday had always been tender, but Khalid's assurance of now carried a weight she could not resist. He invited her for coffee, then dinners, always in places Arman could never afford. At first, Zara told herself it was only friendship, a harmless escape from the monotony of her days. But the sparkle of luxury, the thrill of secrecy, and the intoxicating taste of being valued pulled her further into his orbit. Meanwhile, Arman worked harder than ever. He took extra shifts at the factory, accepted overtime others rejected, and came home with aching muscles but renewed determination. Every coin he saved, every meal he skipped, was a silent investment in the dream he and Zara once shared. He believed he was carrying both their burdens, blind to the fact that his sacrifices no longer impressed her. At home, Zara perfected her excuses. "I'm meeting a friend," she would say, adjusting her scarf before slipping out. "I'll be late from the market. Don't wait for me." Arman nodded with trust, too weary and too in love to question her absences. He cooked meals for her, left notes of encouragement by the bedside, and thought himself lucky to have a partner worth every sacrifice. But whispers began to spread. Neighbors noticed Zara stepping into Khalid's gleaming black car, her laughter echoing as the door closed. A childhood friend of Arman's even tried to warn him, "Brother, keep your eyes open." Not everyone smiles with clean intentions. Arman brushed it off with a forced laugh. "Zara would never betray me. She knows our struggles. She knows my heart." One evening, Arman rushed home carrying a modest cake. He had been paid for his overtime and wanted to surprise Zara with a small celebration, a taste of sweetness for their difficult life. He set the table carefully, lit a candle, and waited. Minutes turned to hours. Zara's phone went unanswered. The food grew cold. Still, he waited with patience born of love. Outside, across town, Zara reclined in Khalid's car, her eyes shining as he handed her a velvet box. Inside lay a bracelet, dazzling under the streetlights. She gasped softly, her heart fluttering with a mixture of guilt and excitement. Khalid leaned closer, his voice smooth. "This is only the beginning." Back in the small apartment, Arman blew out the candle, whispering to himself that she must have been delayed. He held on to hope, unaware that hope itself was already slipping away. And so, the betrayal deepened, hidden beneath the fragile mask of loyalty. The truth does not stay buried forever. For months, Arman ignored the warnings, silenced the doubts, and clung to his trust in Zara. But one evening, fate ripped the veil from his eyes. He had finished work earlier than usual and decided to surprise her with dinner at a modest restaurant in town. As he entered, searching for her familiar smile, his gaze froze. Across the room, beneath golden chandeliers, sat Zara, laughing, radiant, her hand resting on Khalid's arm as though it belonged there. The bracelet Arman could never afford gleamed on her wrist. For a moment, Arman could not breathe. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversations, all vanished beneath the roar of betrayal in his ears. He wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the intimacy in her gestures, the softness in her laughter, left no room for illusions. When Zara noticed him, her smile faltered. Khalid turned, unfazed, and offered a smug nod. Arman's heart cracked like glass. He left without a word, each step heavier than the last, carrying the weight of shattered trust. That night, confrontation was unavoidable. Zara returned home, her tone sharp, her defenses ready. "Why were you spying on me?" she snapped. Arman's voice trembled, but not from anger, from devastation. "Spying? Zara, I saw you. After everything, after all I've sacrificed, is this what I deserve?" Her eyes flashed with something colder than regret. "Arman, love doesn't pay the bills. I'm tired of living like this. I deserve better, and you cannot give it to me." Her words struck deeper than any betrayal. He realized then that it was not only her body she had given away, but her loyalty, her patience, her belief in him. What remained was emptiness. Arman broke down that night, the walls of his strength collapsing. He wept like a man who had lost not just his wife, but his very purpose. Every late shift, every saved coin, every dream, they all felt meaningless. But pain has a way of forging steel from weakness. In the silence that followed, Arman's grief hardened into resolve. If she believed he was nothing, he would prove her wrong. Not to win her back, but to rise beyond her judgment. The next morning, he looked at himself in the mirror. His eyes were swollen, but behind them flickered something new: determination. He quit waiting for someday and began acting for now. He sought mentors, studied relentlessly, and learned skills that could open doors beyond the factory walls. Each failure fueled him. Each small success sharpened his resolve. Zara noticed the shift, but by then she was too entangled in Khalid's promises to care. She assumed Arman's determination was desperation, not transformation. She was wrong. Late one night, as he burned an old photograph of their wedding, Arman whispered a vow, not to her, but to himself. "You broke me, Zara. But from these ashes, I will rise." And in that quiet room, a new chapter began. Years passed, and the man who once staggered beneath the weight of betrayal no longer resembled the broken figure Zara had left behind. Arman's persistence bore fruit. What began as small investments and late-night study turned into opportunities, first a side business, then a company, and eventually an empire. His name became synonymous with determination. The poor man who had once struggled to buy a pair of earrings now signed contracts worth millions. With success came respect. Newspapers featured his rise as a story of resilience, and communities that once pitted him now applauded his willpower. He moved into a mansion far removed from the cramped room where he had once dreamed of more. His cars gleamed under the sun, his staff awaited his instructions, and his future stretched wide before him. Yet within, he remained calm, disciplined, untouched by arrogance. He had learned his worth the hard way, and no riches could shake his clarity. He had risen not because of Zara, but in spite of her. Zara's path, however, was far less golden. Khalid, the man who had dazzled her with promises, eventually grew tired. She was no longer a novelty in his world of endless luxury. When her charm faded, so did his interest. One day, he simply moved on, leaving her with no gifts, no security, and no love. She returned to the same cramped alleys she had once despised, but this time, without Arman's loyalty to shield her. The whispers of neighbors grew louder, mocking the woman who traded devotion for vanity. Their paths crossed again on a rainy afternoon. Arman was stepping out of his car, surrounded by associates, when he heard a trembling voice behind him. He turned to see Zara, her clothes worn, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. She reached for him as though for salvation. "Arman, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. I lost everything. I see it now. Give me another chance." For a long moment, silence hung between them. The old Arman, the man who once wept for her betrayal, flickered in his memory. But the new Arman, the man forged in fire, stood firm. He met her gaze, his tone steady, his words sharp as truth. "Zara, you chose wealth over love. And in doing so, you lost both. I am not the man you left behind. And you are not the woman I once loved." Her tears mixed with the rain, but he did not waver. He stepped into his car, his world of success closing the door on her forever. As the vehicle pulled away, Zara collapsed on the sidewalk, realizing that in chasing gold, she had discarded the rarest treasure of all, loyalty. Arman, staring out of the window, allowed himself a final thought, not of revenge, but of freedom. Betrayal had tried to bury him, but instead, it had planted the seed of his rebirth. And so, the poor man became rich, not merely in wealth, but in dignity, resilience, and the unshakable truth that success is the sweetest answer to betrayal. White heavy checkmark. Now the 2,000-word, 4-section narrative arc is complete. 1. Section 1. Humble beginnings, cracks in love. 2. Section 2. Temptation, betrayal begins. 3. Section 3. Discovery, heartbreak, transformation. 4. Section 4. Success, downfall of betrayer, moral closure.